The keycard printer jammed again at exactly 2:47 a.m. That was the third time that winter. Always the same hour, always that grinding click like it didn't want to spit the card out. Len was downstairs doing rounds, and I was alone at the front desk. Snow tapped gently against the windows in that soft, constant way that made it easy to forget how cold it really was outside. And then I heard the lobby door open. No footsteps, no voice, just that soft chime, and then silence. When I looked up, a man was already standing at the counter, coat soaked, hood up, not moving. He didn't blink when I greeted him. He just placed a room key on the desk, one of ours, and whispered, "Not until 2:47. Let me know where you're listening from tonight, and if you've ever stayed somewhere that just didn't feel quite right. And if these stories help keep you company, consider subscribing so you won't miss the next one." My name's Dana Ellis. I was 37 when this happened, working nights at a seasonal lodge just outside Leadville, Colorado. That winter was my 7th at the Snowcap, a mid-sized mountain property that mostly served skiers, long-haul drivers, and the occasional lost tourist who took a wrong turn off Route 24. I wasn't new to weird guests. You work graveyard long enough, you get used to sleepwalkers, drunks, or folks checking in who don't want to give a last name. But that year, things were different. It was the winter of 2006. We'd had early snow that November, and by mid-December the passes were already closing by sundown most nights. Business was steady, especially around the holidays, but on the night this started, it was slow. Only 5 of our 24 rooms were occupied. Len Turner, our overnight maintenance guy, had just started his shift. He was reliable, quiet in his late 40s, kept mostly to himself. That particular night, he'd offered to do an extra snow sweep of the back lot, so I was holding down the front desk alone. Around 11:00 p.m., a guest came in with a last-minute booking. We called him the quiet man, middle-aged, maybe 50 or so. Wore a dark coat hood, pulled low, gloves still on when he signed the check-in form. Didn't ask for any recommendations, didn't mention the weather, didn't ask for Wi-Fi. Just handed over his ID and credit card, then stood there staring like he was waiting for something. I checked him into room 237, second floor north wing. Not the nicest view, but decent enough. I remember how heavy the silence felt after he left the lobby. The first night was uneventful. He didn't call for towels, didn't request a wake-up, didn't come down for coffee in the morning. Len said he'd seen the guy just once, walking slowly down the hall. After midnight, no bags, just pacing like he was waiting for a call that never came. But nothing about that was all that strange. Some folks just traveled different. It was the second night when things turned. The weather had worsened fast, temperature dropped to -8, and the wind was picking up hard against the siding. Around 2:40 a.m., I went to reprint a keycard for a couple in 211 who'd locked themselves out. That's when the printer jammed. It wasn't the first time we kept meaning to replace that old reader, but corporate dragged their feet. Still, what was odd wasn't just that it jammed, it was the time. 2:47 a.m. on the dot. The screen flashed, the card stopped halfway out, and the whole system buzzed like it was trying to start itself over. I wrote down the time because I had to note it in the log. That's something we did after hours when equipment glitched, just in case it became a recurring issue. I got it working again after a reset and didn't think much of it. Not until the next night. Another snowstorm, this one worse. Only 3 guests in the building now. Len was out shoveling the walk for the 4th time that night. The desk was quiet radio playing some late-night jazz station out of Denver. Then right at 2:47 a.m., the printer jammed again. Same sound, same error code, but this time it was already printing something when it stopped. A room key, one I hadn't initiated. I picked it up. Room 237. That made no sense. I hadn't touched the keyboard, and we hadn't had any issues from 237, not a single call or complaint. I figured maybe Len had tried to reprogram a spare card using the mobile device from downstairs, but when I radioed to check, he said no. He hadn't touched the system. I walked upstairs with the key in hand just to make sure. Nothing was wrong. The hallway was quiet, long, and dimly lit with that kind of orange glow you get from old bulbs behind frosted glass covers. Room 237's door was closed. Nothing unusual, no sound. I knocked, no answer. I knocked again, a little louder. Still nothing. Policy said we could enter for wellness checks if we had reason to believe someone might be hurt, so I used the key. The room was empty, bed made, lights off, no bags, no sign of use. It looked exactly like it had the day I'd checked him in, but the key I'd opened it with had today's date. That's when I went back to the logbook. I pulled the paperwork from 2 nights earlier, the registration form the quiet man had filled out. I checked the name, then the license. The ID was gone. We always photocopied IDs, but the printout in the file was blank. It had the outline of the ID card, even the timestamp and my initials in the corner, but the middle was just white, like the image had never taken. I checked the camera footage for the lobby going back to the night he checked in, but there was no file for that hour. Just a 12-minute gap between 10:47 and 10:59 p.m. Len helped me pull the backup drives, but it was the same there, like the system had just skipped that stretch entirely. I called the number he'd written on the check-in form, disconnected. I looked up the address. It belonged to an abandoned auto body shop in Arizona. That night I didn't sleep, and the next day I asked Len if he'd seen the man leave. He frowned and said no. Come to think of it, he hadn't seen the guy since the night he checked in. We opened the room together just after noon, still empty, still untouched. But this time the window was open. Just a crack, barely wide enough for a breeze, but enough to let in a slow drift of snow onto the sill. There were no footprints outside, no tire marks, just white, untouched powder all the way to the tree line. That night, Len offered to stay at the desk with me. The printer stayed quiet until 2:47 a.m. Then it whirred on its own. Same jam, same half-ejected card. Room 237. Again. We both stared at it for a long time. Neither of us touched it. A week later, a regional rep came to perform a scheduled inspection. I pulled her aside and asked if there had ever been any issues with room 237. She gave me a look like she didn't want to say too much. But then she told me quietly, that room was supposed to stay offline after the incident in '98. I thought we removed it from the system. I didn't ask what the incident was. I didn't want to know. And after that, whenever the printer jammed, I didn't try to fix it. I just unplugged the machine and turned off the lights. If a guest asked for a reprint after 2:30 a.m., they could wait until morning. That was the last winter I worked at the snowcap. But I still keep the printout, the one with the blank ID and the check-in form, with room 237 circled. The date at the top is December 21st, but the timestamp printed underneath 2:47 a.m. I don't usually talk about this. It's one of those memories that makes people look at you differently, like you've wandered too far into the dark and didn't quite make it back. It happened after my second knee surgery, the one that didn't go right. I'd already been retired a few years by then, after spending 3 decades with the Dallas PD, mostly in violent crimes. My daughter, Sarah, was living in California at the time, too far to help, but insistent that I not stay alone while I recovered. She found a budget extended stay place out along Highway 59, one of the only options I could afford that wasn't a complete dump. The Lonier Motor Lodge was one of those holdover motels built sometime in the 70s, back when the idea of a highway getaway still had some charm. It had that faded turquoise paint you could spot from a mile away, a neon sign that buzzed like it was trying to stay alive, and maybe 20 rooms in total. Pete, the owner, gave me a decent monthly rate and seemed to run the place single-handedly, aside from a housekeeper named Elena. I checked into room 214, second floor, overlooking the gravel parking lot, and a roadside diner that only served breakfast till noon. The room was functional stiff mattress, brown industrial carpet, and an AC unit that wheezed louder than a diesel engine. But it was clean, and I figured I could live with the noise if it meant peace and quiet. I had a routine: morning exercises, a little reading, maybe a sandwich from the diner, and early nights with the news humming low. It felt simple. It felt safe. Elena cleaned my room every other day. She couldn't have been more than 25. Always polite, soft-spoken eyes, a little too wide for someone her age. She moved quietly, quickly, never lingering. Never made small talk, never met your eyes directly. At first, I figured she was just shy. But as the days went on, I started to notice that she wasn't just avoiding eye contact. She was avoiding something. Or someone. Room 237 was the one next to mine. It stayed empty for the first couple of weeks, or at least that's what I thought. Then one night, close to midnight, I heard voices. The walls in those old buildings were thin, and I'd already heard enough late-night TV from other rooms to know the difference between normal noise and something else. What I heard through the wall wasn't laughter or a television. It was quiet, urgent Spanish, multiple voices, whispering in a way that carried tension, not casual conversation. One voice, I think a woman was crying between words. Another voice, a man's barked commands. Then another, a third voice, softer, sounded like it was begging. I pressed my ear to the wall. The moment I did, the voices stopped completely. The next morning, Elena came to clean earlier than usual. I asked her as casually as I could whether room 237 had been rented out. She froze mid-step and said, "I don't know nothing about that room," before leaving a fresh towel on the bed and practically fleeing. Her hands were trembling. Over the next week, the pattern continued. Room 237 would be silent all day, then come alive at night, voices shuffling sometimes, muffled sobbing. Always between 10 and 3. Never any light under the door. No one ever passed me in the hallway. When I sat by the window, I started noticing something else. Cars came and went, but never the same one twice. Old sedans, work vans, a beat-up pickup with Nevada plates. They'd pull in after dark. People would go upstairs, stay an hour, leave. No suitcases, no luggage racks, just movement. I started jotting things down in a notebook, not just the car descriptions, but what I heard, the timing, the tone of the voices. Tuesday night, someone said something about mañana and camión, tomorrow, and the truck. Thursday, I heard the crying again, but this time it turned into pleading in English. A woman saying, "Please, no, please, I won't say anything." Then silence. Elena's behavior changed. She started coming by at odd hours, once at 7 in the morning, another time well past 6 in the evening. She seemed jumpy, kept glancing at the hallway, flinched every time a door clicked. I caught her once, just standing outside room 237 with her cleaning cart not moving, just staring at the door. When she saw me, she bolted like I'd caught her doing something illegal. That night I saw her outside talking to a man in a truck, not Pete. Big guy, short hair, kept pointing up at the second floor while Elena shook her head. The way she backed away from him, you'd think he'd raised his hand. I asked Pete about the activity in 237. He told me it was a family passing through. Temporary housing. Said they were just private folks looking to stay low-key while they found something permanent. But families don't show up in different cars each night, and families don't move like ghosts. By now, I'd stopped sleeping. The pain in my knee didn't help, but the sounds were worse. I heard someone gagging one night. Another time, a girl young by the sound of it sobbed quietly for nearly 30 minutes. The breaking point came on a Thursday. Rain coming down, steady, soft thunder overhead. Around 11, 2 white vans pulled into the lot. No markings. 6 men climbed out along with a dozen people. Women, a couple teenage boys. They moved quickly. No talking. Elena opened the door to room 237 with shaking hands, while one man stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder. Not comforting, controlling. I had my phone out and took pictures. Plates, faces, that touch. The next morning I caught Pete in the office talking on the phone. He didn't see me standing outside the door. I heard him say something about Thursday's shipment and 50 grand. Then I heard him say the girl who cleans knows too much. I called my old partner Jake, still worked with the feds, and told him everything. Within 2 hours, the FBI and Texas Rangers had a task force assembled. The next shipment was 2 nights away. Wednesday afternoon, I found Elena in the laundry room. She looked exhausted. Her hands were red from scrubbing. I told her I knew what was happening, that help was coming. She broke down. Said they'd kill her sister if she didn't cooperate. Her sister had been taken months earlier. She'd only agreed to help Pete's operation to keep her alive. Thursday night, the rain returned. A cold, steady downpour. At 10:47 p.m., the vans arrived. I watched from behind the curtain as the operation unfolded. The agents moved in silently, swarming the lot, blocking the exits. There was no screaming, no shots, just swift, practiced arrests. Pete was cuffed outside the office, still protesting like it was some kind of misunderstanding. Elena collapsed in the lot, sobbing into a blanket a female agent wrapped around her. That night, 42 people were rescued. Within weeks, Elena's sister was found alive in Houston. Pete and his crew were charged federally. Elena testified, was granted asylum, and last I heard started nursing school in Dallas. The Lonier Motor Lodge was shut down for good. They boarded up the windows, stripped the sign. But sometimes when I can't sleep, I still hear that woman's voice, the one who whispered, Please, no. I won't say anything. And I wonder how many others passed through room 237, and how many of them never left. I was between assignments just trying to fill in a week with some scenery and silence when I ended up at the Crosswinds Inn. A short listing in one of those guidebooks with too many adjectives had described it as a rustic escape nestled between wind and wonder. That sounded about right for me in early March, after a long winter and an even longer breakup. The inn sat about 45 minutes west of Bozeman, tucked along an old two-lane road that led nowhere in particular. There was no cell signal by the time I arrived, no gas station for 10 miles, just long fields of pale grass and black-leaning fence posts, and in the distance gray hills that held onto snow like secrets. The inn was a 2-story L-shaped structure with a steep, shingled roof, a chimney that always seemed to be puffing something fragrant, and one of those wooden signs where the letters had to be hand-painted every spring. When I pulled up, the parking lot was empty, except for a silver Subaru and a pickup covered in dust. Inside it was warmer than I expected. The front desk sat across from a brick fireplace that crackled softly, and a woman with short gray hair and tired eyes stood behind the counter flipping through a guest log. She introduced herself as Darla, and she told me they were quiet this week. I'd have my pick of the rooms, she said, so long as it wasn't number 7 plumbing issues. I asked her which room had the best light, and she handed me the key to room 9 without looking up. The room was plain but fine. A brass bed frame with a soft quilt, a single window facing east, and a small desk that looked like it had been stolen from a boarding school. There was no TV, no radio, and no Wi-Fi. But I'd brought books and my own thoughts, and sometimes that's enough. The first night I sat by the window and watched the fog roll in over the low hills. Something about that landscape, flat, but breathing cold but not cruel, made me feel like I was in one of those old films where the weather matters. Around midnight, I turned off the lights and tucked myself under the quilt. That's when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, measured, like someone pacing. A step or two, then a pause, then another step. I figured maybe it was another guest stretching their legs. But after 10 minutes, the sound hadn't changed. Just back and forth, right outside my door. I opened it gently and peeked out. The hall was empty. The lights above flickered once, but no one was there. I told myself it was old pipes or wood settling something I'd misread. The next morning at breakfast, a pot of coffee and some scones laid out near the hearth. I met Mags, the housekeeper. She was probably in her 50s, with hair pulled back in a blue bandana and the kind of tired shoulders you only get from long years of bending over sheets and sinks. I asked her how many other guests were staying. She raised an eyebrow and said, "Just you and Mrs. Quinn." And she doesn't pace. That night I couldn't sleep. The pacing came back around the same time, footsteps sliding softly over the worn rug outside my door. But this time I also heard a door open, then close. Not mine. Down the hall. The next morning I asked Darla again about room 7. I was polite but direct. She hesitated, said it wasn't in use, said they used it for storage now. But I'd seen her the night before, around 11 p.m., standing near room 7 with a key in her hand, her eyes darting like she didn't want to be seen. She hadn't noticed me at the stairwell. I started paying more attention. During the day, the hallway was empty, and room 7's door looked like any other plain brown, numbered in tarnished brass. But at night, the atmosphere changed. The air felt colder near that end of the hall. Once, when I walked by after dinner, I caught the faint scent of old cologne. Another time I passed quickly and heard whispering behind the door, a man's voice, low and clipped, but speaking in rhythmic, almost rehearsed phrases. I leaned closer and the whispering stopped. I asked Mrs. Quinn, a sweet, skeletal woman who spent most of her time in the library room on the first floor, if she'd ever stayed in room 7. Her teacup rattled as she set it down and she whispered, "I don't think anyone stays in 7 anymore, dear. Not since the man left." I said nothing, but she must have seen something in my face because she added, "They say he'd book the same week every March, kept to himself, always left the room spotless. But something wasn't right. I used to hear him talking to the mirror. That night I stood outside room 7 for a long time, just listening. I heard faint movement again, like someone folding clothing. No voices this time, no pacing. But the strangest thing, when I held my breath, I could hear breathing on the other side, slow, steady, and close. I knocked once. No answer. I walked away, but I didn't sleep. On my 5th morning, I decided to take a photo of the inn for my article. I stepped outside after breakfast, waited for the sun to break through the clouds, and framed the building carefully with my phone. Later, while reviewing the shots in my room, something struck me. I counted the windows, rooms 1 through 10. 10 rooms. But there were only 9 visible windows on the 2nd floor. One was missing. I went back outside, counted again. Same result. The window to room 7 wasn't there. From inside the hallway it clearly should have been, but from the lawn it was just wall-blank siding where the window should have been. I brought it up to Darla. She just looked past me and said, "Sometimes it's better not to count windows in old buildings." That night was my last. The pacing began earlier than usual. By 10, I could hear the footsteps again. Then the door to room 7 creaked open very slowly. I didn't go out. I sat in the dark and watched the hallway through the crack in my door. Nothing moved, but I felt it something in the atmosphere, like a shift in pressure. At 2:14 a.m., I heard my doorknob rattle gently, just once. Then silence. In the morning, room 7's door was wide open. Inside there was no furniture, no storage boxes, just an empty room with floral wallpaper, a cracked mirror on one wall, and a bare mattress directly on the floor. No lamp, no outlets, nothing else. I took a picture of the mirror. When I looked at it later, there were 2 reflections. Mine and a man standing just behind me, eyes fixed forward, blurred like motion during a long exposure. I never turned around. I never heard anyone leave. But when I checked out, Mags looked at me with something like pity and said, "You should delete that photo. Some things keep themselves alive that way. I don't know what I believe. I still have the picture, though. It's saved somewhere in a folder I don't open, because I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know room 7 was never in the photos. I never stayed in fancy places. I wasn't built for them. Most of my working years were spent up poles or walking right-of-ways, and after I retired, I kept to the habit of back-road motels, places where you park 10 feet from your bed and no one offers to fold your towel like a swan. That summer I was driving south through Oregon, heading nowhere in particular, when I found myself outside a little town called Drain. Fitting name, I thought. The rain had just let up, and the hills looked soft and mossy, almost tired. I pulled into the Timberline Motel just after 7 p.m. It sat alone on a slight curve of Highway 138, one of those places with an old neon vacancy sign that still buzzed and a wooden office that doubled as someone's living room. I parked beneath a dripping pine and walked into the front room where a woman in her 50s, strong shoulders, wide smile, greeted me with a look that said she hadn't seen many guests that week. Her name was Claire, and she handed me the key to room 4 without much fuss. Said she kept a fresh pot of coffee going till midnight if I wanted some. The room was clean enough, wood paneling, beige carpet, those plastic-covered paper cups next to the sink. The kind of place you stay when you need shelter, not charm. I settled in, unpacked a flannel shirt and a book of crossword puzzles, and turned on the small wall heater to knock out the chill. Outside, the rain started up again. Not heavy, just that steady patter that feels like it could last all week. I didn't mind it. Made the room feel like a pocket of warmth in the middle of nowhere. Around 10, I stepped outside to smoke. The lot was quiet except for one other vehicle, a red pickup parked 2 spaces over, backed in tight with its tailgate down. I hadn't heard it pull up, but that wasn't unusual. Some folks move like ghosts. The truck looked old but well kept, with faded stickers on the bumper and a cooler strapped in the back. As I smoked, I noticed something strange. There was only one tire track in the gravel lot. Just the one curved in from the highway. No second set where the other side of the truck should have rolled. I bent down, ran my hand across the gravel. It wasn't disturbed on the far side. No tread, just pine needles and a little moss. Inside the office, Claire was pouring herself tea. I asked if anyone had checked in besides me. She gave a hesitant smile and said, "Room 3, just about an hour ago." Young guy, quiet. That night I slept light. Something about the heater kept clicking like it was cycling too fast, and the wind picked up just after midnight. I heard what sounded like a knock, not on my door, but somewhere nearby. I sat up and listened. Nothing followed, just the wind and a soft hum of the road. The next morning, I saw Claire outside with a broom sweeping puddles away from the walkway. She looked tired. I asked about the guy in room 3, and she paused like she was trying to remember. Said he'd paid in cash, hadn't said much, and asked if there was anywhere around here that stayed open late. He hadn't taken the coffee or asked for a map. She hadn't seen him since. I walked past room 3 on my way to the vending machine. The blinds were pulled shut, but the door was locked and the Do Not Disturb card was still hanging. I caught my reflection in the window. And then I noticed something behind the curtain. Not movement, but the kind of shape that looks like it's standing still, waiting. I stayed there a second longer than I should have, then went back to my room and packed my things. I left around 11 that day, planning to head farther south. About 15 minutes down the highway, I stopped at a turnout to double-check the map. That's when I saw the truck again. Same red pickup, same tailgate, half open. Parked on the shoulder facing east opposite direction from the motel. But again, just one tire track behind it. One side. The other side sat clean, no indent, no gravel kicked up. Just forest moss all the way up to the tire. A few days later, I circled back north, and something in me said I should check in on that motel. When I pulled into the Timberline, Claire looked surprised to see me. I asked if the man from room 3 had checked out. She went pale, said he was gone by morning. But when she cleaned the room, the bed hadn't been slept in. No trash, no signs of use, except the mirror fogged in a perfect oval like someone had stood breathing close to it. Even though the room had been cold all night, she didn't want to talk about it after that. She handed me a card for the sheriff's office and told me, if I saw the truck again, I should call. I did. I saw it a third time. This time it was parked behind an abandoned rest stop off the 5, almost hidden in the trees. Same truck, same tailgate down. But no driver, no prints in the soft dirt, just a cooler in the back, lid slightly open, and that same single tire track leading in. I didn't get out of the car. A month later, I got a call from Sheriff Noller. He asked if I'd be willing to describe the truck again. Said they'd found one matching that description left deep in the woods, no license plates, battery long dead. But here's what he said, that I still think about. There were 2 sets of tires on that truck, different brands, different wear patterns, as if one side had been changed years ago, and the other side never touched dirt. He told me there were reports going back decades of a truck just like it being seen near motels, trailheads, highway pull-offs, always parked in places it shouldn't be, with no sign of a driver. Sometimes guests reported hearing footsteps outside their rooms and finding nothing. One hiker claimed he followed it down an old service road, only for the truck to vanish behind a bend. No sound, no engine, just gone. Another said she saw someone standing beside it, a man with no shoes staring at the trees. I asked him what he thought it was. He didn't answer. But before we hung up, he said something I can't forget. He said, every time someone reports seeing that truck, it's always the same. The passenger side leaves no mark, like it's not touching the ground at all. I haven't stayed at a roadside motel since. I still drive, but I stick to the cities now. I park in garages. I don't go near forested shoulders. And when I see tire tracks in gravel, I count them, every time. I used to do long-haul sales for a regional supply company, the kind of job where you get real familiar with interstate exits and motel coffee. You'd think after 20 years I'd be used to the rhythm of it, but there were always stretches that made you feel like the last person left awake in the country. That was the feeling I had driving into Ashdown. It was early April, still too cold to sleep in my car, and the sky had that washed-out yellow that meant rain wasn't far off. I passed 2 shuttered gas stations and a sign half-eaten by kudzu before I found a vacancy light blinking under a dying oak. The place was called Bramble Hollow Motor Inn, maybe 8 rooms all facing the lot. The office looked more like a taxidermy shop than a front desk cluttered with dusty deer heads and a faded Arkansas Razorbacks pennant. A middle-aged woman in a crocheted cardigan greeted me with a worn smile. Her name tag read Janet, and she moved like someone who'd worked there her whole life. She asked if I had a reservation. I said no, just passing through. That's when her eyes got a little funny. She turned the guest book around and pointed to the bottom of the page. My name, Joel Parrish, was already written there. Same spelling, same looping J I've always done, without thinking. Room 3. I thought it was a joke. Maybe another Joel Parrish had passed through earlier, and they'd confused us. But the time next to the entry said 6:42 p.m., just 10 minutes before I walked in. I checked my watch. It was dead on. Janet blinked a few times and said, You just stepped out to grab something, didn't you?" I told her no, that I'd never been there before in my life. Her smile faded and she offered room 4 instead. Said the other Joel must have left. I didn't argue. It was late, the storm was rolling in, and I'd driven 9 hours already. The room was fine, dated but clean. Same fake wood paneling and humming fridge I'd come to expect. I dropped my bag, turned on the lamp, and tried to shake off the feeling that something was just a little wrong. I went back out once for ice. Room 3's curtains were drawn, but I saw the glow of a TV through the crack. Someone was inside. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. The rain had started in steady sheets, and the gutters outside the walkway overflowed with a sound like rushing static. Around 2:20 a.m., I heard a knock. It was soft, not on my door, but the one next to mine. Then footsteps. I waited. Another knock. When I opened my door, the lot was empty. The air was cold and wet, and all I could hear was the gutter spilling water into a puddle by the vending machine. Room 3 was dark now. The next morning, I stopped in the office to return the key. Janet was on the phone but waved me over. Her expression had changed. She looked nervous, unsure. She pointed to the guest book again. Joel Parrish Room 3 had been crossed out in red ink. I asked who changed it. She shook her head and said, "He never came back, left the room spotless, but the bed was still made, like no one slept in it." Out of curiosity, I peeked in through Room 3's window before leaving. The curtains were half open now, and inside it looked untouched. But on the desk was something that made my stomach drop. A stack of business cards identical to mine, same company, same design, except the phone number was wrong. It ended in 2643. Mine ends in 2603. Later that week, I called Officer Radley, an old contact I had in Arkansas, who helped cover our regional vendor agreements. I asked if he'd ever heard anything about Bramble Hollow. There was a pause. He said, "You stayed there recently." I told him I had just one night. He asked if anything strange had happened. I told him about the name in the logbook. That's when he told me this wasn't the first time. Twice before, guests had reported checking in and finding their names already written down. Sometimes with slightly altered information, a phone number off by one digit, a different middle initial. One guy said he saw a man on the security footage who looked just like him. Same shirt, same duffel bag, entering the office a full 20 minutes before he arrived. I asked if there was footage from my night. Radley said the camera system had glitched that evening. All they had was static from 6:30 to 7:10 p.m. I asked if it could have been identity theft or a prank. He just said, "Then why'd he check out without taking anything? Why didn't he sleep in the bed?" I haven't been back to Arkansas since, but sometimes I still wonder what would have happened if I'd insisted on Room 3, or answered the knock at 2:20, or tried that wrong number 2643 just to see who picked up. I've kept that business card in my glove box ever since, and every so often I pull it out and stare at it. The paper's starting to fade now, but the name, my name, is still sharp and clean, as if whoever left it behind knew I'd come, looking eventually. Back in the spring of 2019, Landon and I booked a last-minute getaway up in the Blue Ridge foothills. We'd been scraping through a rough patch, and I guess we thought a few quiet days with no reception and no distractions might reset something. The place was called Lone Hollow Lodge, Not really a lodge, more like a cluster of little cabins tucked around a gravel loop about 6 miles up from the nearest gas station. It had decent reviews and cheap weekday rates, which was enough for us. We got there late afternoon just as the light started slipping behind the ridges. The property manager, a woman named Ms. Carla, met us in the gravel lot outside the check-in office. She was polite, but brief, handed us a metal keyring with a wooden tag for cabin 4 and told us to avoid the ridge trails after dark. The terrain shifts on its own up here, she said. I didn't know what she meant, and I didn't ask. Cabin 4 was small but cozy wood-paneled walls, a propane stove, and a squeaky screen door that snapped back hard when it shut. From our little porch, we could see 2 other cabins across the gravel loop. One of them, cabin 6, had a long string of yellow porch lights glowing, even though the sun was still up. The curtains were drawn tight, and the windows gave off a strange, dull glare, like they were covered from the inside with wax paper or something. I asked Landon if he thought anyone was staying there, and he shrugged. Maybe they left the lights on by accident, but they weren't the kind of lights you forget. They wrapped the railings and the posts in careful spirals. Every bulb lit, every light warm and steady. It looked almost festive, like someone was expecting company. That night I got up around 1:30 a.m. to use the bathroom and peeked out the curtain above the kitchen sink. Cabin 6 still had all the lights on. I could see one of the curtains move, but I didn't see a person behind it. Just a sort of ripple, like someone brushing a heavy fabric from the other side. I went back to bed and didn't say anything. The next morning, we walked the loop trail that circled the property. It led behind all the cabins and passed through a patch of pine so thick the ground didn't get much light. As we rounded the bend behind cabin 6, I noticed something that made me stop. There were several pairs of shoes, men's, women's, and even children's, lined neatly beneath the back deck. All of them looked old, but clean. They weren't tossed or forgotten like someone had dropped them. They were arranged almost like part of a display. I took a picture thinking maybe I'd ask Ms. Carla about it later, but when we passed back through the loop again that afternoon, the shoes were gone. That night we played cards on the porch, and I kept glancing at cabin 6. It looked the same as before. Lights still on, curtains still drawn, windows giving off that weird, blurred shine. Around 10 p.m., Landon pointed something out. "That rocking chair's moving," he said. I looked where he was pointing, and sure enough, the chair on cabin 6's porch was swaying gently back and forth. But the wind had died hours ago. The trees were still. We watched for almost 10 minutes. No one came out. The chair kept rocking. Eventually, Landon got uncomfortable and went inside. I stayed a little longer, telling myself it was just the way the boards settled in the night air. But that didn't explain what happened next. Just after 2 a.m., I heard footsteps on our porch. Not heavy, more like someone in slippers. Slow, deliberate. I sat up in bed and looked at the door, expecting to see Landon's shadow, but he was still asleep beside me. The footsteps paused, then circled around to the side window. I didn't see anyone. I didn't hear the screen door creak open. But when I finally got the nerve to lift the curtain, the rocking chair across the loop had stopped moving. The next day, I brought it up to Ms. Carla. She was inside the office, refilling a candy dish with peppermints. I mentioned the lights in cabin 6 and how they never seemed to go off. Her face didn't change, but her voice dropped slightly. "It's occupied," she said. "She's been there a long time." I asked if she meant a full-time resident. She nodded but didn't say anything more. Just slid the peppermint dish closer and turned back to her clipboard. That afternoon, Landon decided to go into town for a signal and catch up on some work emails. I stayed behind and went for a walk around the property again. Something had been tugging at me, not fear exactly, but a quiet wrongness I couldn't shake. I circled past Cabin 6 one more time. The porch lights flickered slightly in the overcast sky, and I saw the curtain twitch again. Only this time, the door opened. An elderly woman stepped out barefoot, her hair completely white and pulled into a tight bun. She was wearing a faded blue dress that hung off her frame like it had been made for someone else. Her eyes were fixed on the woods behind me, not on me, and when she finally did look my way, I felt a kind of pressure in my chest, like I'd just walked into a room where something terrible had happened and no one had cleaned it up. She didn't say anything, just raised one hand slightly, then turned and went back inside. The door closed behind her without a sound. I told Landon about it that night and he laughed it off. "Probably just a lonely lady," he said. "Maybe she keeps the lights on for company." I didn't push it. We checked out the next morning. As we were loading the car, I looked across the lot one last time. The porch lights at Cabin 6 were still on, but the curtains had been pulled back just enough to see inside. There was no furniture in the room, no rocking chair, no rug, no lamps, just a bare cabin with yellow bulbs strung along the ceiling plugged into nothing. When we got back home, I went through my phone and tried to find the photo I'd taken of the shoes under the deck. It wasn't there. Not in the cloud, not in the trash, not on the SD card, just gone. Sometimes I go online and try to look up reviews for Lone Hollow Lodge. There's still a listing, but it only shows cabins 1 through 5. No mention of 6. No porch lights. No old woman in a blue dress. Just a map that ends in an empty bend of gravel. I still wonder who lived there, or who wanted us to think they did. Back in 2015, I was doing contract work with the Arkansas State Highway Department logging survey data for a new stretch of bypass near the Ozark foothills. I stayed in little towns that didn't show up on my GPS, the kind where the motels have handwritten vacancy signs and everyone knows when you're not local. One of those places was called Wilbraham Bend. It sat along a slow curl of river where the air smelled like wet stone and pine needles even in July. I was there 3 nights. There wasn't much open past 7 p.m., except a place called May's Diner, the kind of spot with checkered curtains and a jukebox that still took quarters. The first night I stopped in there was one other person sitting at a booth near the back window. A boy, maybe 16 or 17, wearing a royal blue hoodie with the hood up, even though it was still over 80 degrees out. He had a plate of eggs and grits in front of him, untouched. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't reading. Just staring across the diner like he was waiting for someone who hadn't shown up yet. Connie, the woman who ran the place, brought me coffee and asked if I was working the road crew. I said yes, and she smiled like she already knew. She glanced over her shoulder at the kid and lowered her voice. He always orders the same thing, never eats. Don't pay him much mind. I looked back toward the booth, but it was empty. No dishes, no boy, just a folded napkin on the table perfectly square. I figured I'd just missed him getting up. Maybe he'd stepped out, but when I came back the next night there, he was again. Same booth, same blue hoodie, same plate of eggs and grits. Again, he didn't touch them. Just sat there with his hands on the table, still and silent. I caught his reflection in the window, pale face, hollow eyes, skin like he hadn't been out in the sun all summer. When Connie came over, I asked if the kid was okay. She shrugged, but her voice had a tired weight to it this time. Some folks here say he's just quiet. Others say he never left that booth. I tried to laugh it off, asked her what that meant. She just refilled my coffee and walked away. The third night was different. The air outside had turned humid and gray, with clouds pressing low enough to feel like the sky had dropped closer. I almost skipped dinner, but my motel microwave had blown a fuse, and I didn't feel like eating peanuts from the vending machine. The diner was empty when I walked in, except for Connie behind the counter. The booth at the back was vacant. No eggs, no boy, no blue hoodie. I sat in my usual spot, ordered a sandwich, and asked about the kid. "Not here tonight," I said, trying to sound casual. Connie gave me a long look like she was weighing something. Then she said, "There's a story. Sheriff Mays says it's not true, but I've been working this counter 18 years, and I know what I've seen." She paused, wiped a spot on the formica that wasn't dirty. 6 years ago, a boy that age, hoodie, same booth, came in every night for 2 weeks. Nobody knew where he was from. Said he was waiting for his uncle to come back from the station downriver. Then one night he left through the back door and no one's seen him since. Not a trace, not even a name. The bell over the door jingled behind me. When I turned around, the boy was there. Same hoodie, same blank face. But this time, he was looking at me. He didn't say anything. Just tilted his head slightly, like he recognized me. I didn't move. Connie didn't move either. It was like the whole place had gone underwater. The air felt thick. The clock above the jukebox ticked once, then stopped. Then the boy walked past me and sat down in the back booth. His plate was already there, eggs steaming like they'd just been made. He looked out the window, didn't glance back. I finished my sandwich in silence. Connie didn't come back to refill anything. When I stood to leave, I passed by the booth and paused. I don't know why I spoke, but I did. "Who are you waiting for?" I asked. The boy blinked, just once. Then he looked at the seat across from him like someone should be sitting there. His lips moved, but I didn't hear anything, not a whisper, just a shimmer of sound like radio static 3 rooms away. I left Wilbraham Bend the next morning. My survey was done, and the motel desk clerk acted surprised when I turned in the key, like he didn't remember giving it to me in the first place. I've passed through that part of Arkansas twice since then. Each time I checked my phone trying to find May's Diner. Nothing came up. No business listing, no map result. Just a historical marker for a railroad trestle that collapsed in 1974. The boy in the blue hoodie. Sometimes I see him in dreams, always sitting across from someone whose face I can't quite see, and always waiting. That was the last one I'll share tonight. Thinking back on these stories, I'm not sure what lingers more, the moments of quiet dread or the details that almost slipped by unnoticed. A light that never turned off. A room key that no one issued. A truck that circled back again and again with no one inside. These stories don't scream. They don't grab you by the throat. They settle instead behind your eyes in the folds of memory. You don't revisit often. The eerie thing about places like these motels, diners, cabins, is how easily they vanish when you're not looking. You pass through once convinced they're real, and then years later you find nothing but a gravel path or an empty listing that ends in a cul-de-sac. Maybe that's the scariest thing. Not the haunted, but the half-forgotten. Not what knocks on the door, but what never left. What we carry with us when we move on, and what waits patiently for us to come back. If these stories reminded you of something, a glance in a hallway, a wrong turn on a quiet road, you're not alone. Not really. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I hope these stories kept you company tonight and maybe left the lights on just a little longer. If you'd like more quiet horror like this, feel free to follow the channel and share this with someone who likes a good late-night story. And tell me, have you ever passed through a place that still lingers in your mind, even if you can't find it on the map anymore? Good night, stay safe, and wherever you rest, may the lights stay steady.